During the summer of 2016, someone was hunting people in Alaska's largest city, and nobody knew why. Random victims. No warnings. No connections. Just terror that would grip an entire community for months. July 3rd, 2016. Morning. Anchorage, Alaska. A cyclist pedaled along a popular downtown trail, enjoying the warmth of the morning sun. Ship Creek Trail was a familiar route, one he'd ridden dozens of times before. As he rounded a curve in the path, something ahead caught his attention. Two figures lying motionless on the ground. He slowed down, trying to make sense of what he was seeing. Maybe someone had fallen. Maybe they needed help. Then he got close enough to see the truth. The cyclist's hands trembled as he backed away and reached for his phone. Within minutes, patrol cars converged on the scene. Officers approached carefully. What they found confirmed the worst. Two people, both deceased. Evidence of weapon fire scattered across the area. Someone had done this. Homicide detectives arrived and began processing the scene. The victims were identified as Brianna Foisey, age 20, and Jason Netter Sr., age 41. Jason Netter was a man who had lived a difficult life. He had a long history with law enforcement, mostly substance-related. He was homeless at the time, living near the area where he lost his life. A friend who shared a storage unit with him told investigators his first thought was that Jason had gotten into trouble with the wrong people. A dirty deal, the friend said. It was a logical theory in a city that was already dealing with a substance crisis. Brianna Foisey was 20 years old. She had been born with fetal alcohol spectrum disorder, a condition that shaped every part of her life. Her adoptive mother, Marcella Foisey, had tried everything to help her, including staging an intervention in a last attempt to pull Brianna away from the path she was on. Brianna had refused the help. She had been struggling dependency challenges and periods of homelessness. She was someone fighting against circumstances that were never fair to begin with. She loved to sing. She was someone who deserved more time than she got. The exact nature of her connection to Jason Netter was never fully made public. Bullet fragments collected at the scene were forwarded to the Alaska State Crime Lab. The findings revealed the rounds were high caliber and traced back to a specific firearm. Now, that is not your everyday street firearm. It was a favorite among collectors and law enforcement officers before semi-automatic alternatives took over. It was large, heavy, about 2.5 pounds, and not easy to conceal. What was it doing here, and who was carrying it? Police had no suspects, and for nearly 4 weeks, no answers either. 26 days passed. Then, on July 29th, just before 3 o'clock in the morning, something happened in East Anchorage that would add a new layer to a story nobody had fully assembled yet. 3 teenage girls were looking out of a window near their home. They noticed a man standing in the shadows near a wooded area. He was tall. He was wearing a camouflage jacket. He was just standing there. Something about it felt off enough that the girls stepped back from the window. Minutes later, a young man on a yellow bicycle came into view. He was riding home from a late shift at work. He did not see what the girls had seen. He had no reason to suspect anything. His name was Trayvon Kendall Thompson. He was 21 years old. Everyone close to him called him Trey. Trey was by every account a good person with a straightforward life. He worked. He came home. He played video games with his friends. He had actually traded his car for a laptop at one point so he could game online. He had no history with drugs or gangs. He had plans to enlist in the military. He was, in every way, simply a young man heading home after a long night at work. He never made it. The girls heard the sound of gunfires. By the time police arrived, Trey had been seriously harmed. He was still alive when officers reached him, but he passed away at the scene shortly after. Security camera footage from the area showed a figure approaching on foot, a pause, and then someone riding away on a yellow bicycle. Because of the camera angle, only the lower half of the person could be seen. It was not enough for an identification. But the three girls had gotten a look at the man standing in the shadows just before the incident. A sketch artist was brought in. What came out of that session was the first real image investigators had of whoever was responsible. A tall man, a camouflage jacket, long hair, and when forensic teams confirmed that the same Colt python had been used on Trey as had been used on Jason Netter and Brianna Foisey 26 days earlier, the Anchorage Police Department understood they had something much bigger than a substance dispute on their hands. They chose not to tell the public about the weapon connection. The reasoning was sound. If word got out about the specific weapon, whoever was carrying it might get rid of it. And right now, the weapon was the only solid thread they had. But here is what made Trey's case so disorienting for investigators. He had no connection whatsoever to the first two individuals affected. Different life, different part of the city, different everything. So why Trey? That question would not get an answer for months. And when it did, the answer would leave one man, a man sitting in a prison cell, completely devastated. 4 weeks went by. The sketch circulated. Tips trickled in. The yellow bicycle was never found. And then, at 1:42 in the morning on August 28th, a woman called police to report a lifeless person on a bicycle path at Valley of the Moon Park in the northwestern part of the city. Officers arrived to find not one victim, two. The first was 34-year-old Kevin Turner. He had been found beneath the park's pavilion. Kevin was homeless, struggling with schizophrenia and bipolar disorder. Care facilities had been difficult for him to stay in. His conditions made the routine hard to manage. He had been living in the park, using the pavilion as a place to sleep. He was there that night because he had nowhere else to go. The second deceased individual was 25-year-old Bryant DeHussan, a well-known figure in Anchorage's environmental community. He had recently bought a new Schwinn bicycle and, according to his father, had headed out that night to ride over to a friend's house, taking the trail through the park. Investigators believe Bryant arrived at the park at exactly the wrong moment, that he came across something already underway and was lost his life because of it. He probably had no idea what he had walked into until it was far too late. The same Colt python, the same early morning window. 5 lives now, all connected by one weapon and one person, moving silently through a city that was only beginning to understand what it was dealing with. Anchorage Police Chief Chris Tolley and Mayor Ethan Berkowitz held a public meeting at Valley of the Moon Park. Nearly 200 residents showed up. The questions were direct. Are we safe? Is one person responsible for all of this? Is there a pattern? The chief's answer was careful. The worst thing we can do is speculate, he said. But the city was already past the point of waiting for official confirmation. Parents were pulling their kids off the trails. Cyclists were changing their routines. The fear was real, and it was spreading faster than any tip line could manage. The FBI came in. A $10,000 reward was posted for information leading to an identification. More than 175 tips came in. Every one of them was followed up. And here's the part that would only become clear much later. At least one of those tips had pointed directly at the right man. But the thread was not pulled far enough. Not yet. So, who was James Dale Ritchie? He was born in November 1976 and grew up right there in Anchorage. He attended East Anchorage High School, where he was hard to miss. Standing 6 feet 3 inches tall and heavily built, he played both football and basketball. He was part of the team that won the 1994 state football championship. He was also sharp in the classroom, scoring 1,200 on his SATs, which opened doors at universities across the country. He was recruited by multiple Division I programs and ultimately accepted at West Virginia University, where he made the football team. He had everything lined up. He was also close friends with two brothers, Quincy and Bobby Thompson. They spent a lot of time together growing up. The day before James left for college, Quincy lost his life in a violent incident and was taken from everyone who loved him. That loss hit James hard as he headed out of Alaska for the first time. He lasted one semester at West Virginia University before dropping out and returning to Anchorage. Whatever had been set in motion during that time, whether it was grief, pressure, a wrong turn, or something already building inside him, James Dale Ritchie came back different. He entered the world of illegal trading. He became involved in illegal animal fighting. Between 1995 and 2005, he accumulated a string of arrests, drug offenses, promoting animal fighting, a narcotics-related home invasion. In 2005, he was arrested for breaking into someone's home in the middle of the night carrying plastic handcuffs and two firearms. Nobody ever found out what he intended to do. He was sentenced to 2 years in prison. After his release, he handed a Colt Python revolver to someone he trusted for safekeeping and left Alaska for Virginia, where his parents were living. He stayed there for several years, relatively quiet, off law enforcement's radar. He traveled around the lower 48 states. The FBI would later investigate whether he was connected to unsolved cases in Virginia, Colorado, and Las Vegas, but nothing was officially confirmed. Then, in early 2016, a relationship ended. James Ritchie packed up and came back to Anchorage. He arrived in March. He tracked down the person who had been holding his Colt Python. He took it back. And before he disappeared back into his daily life, he did something that almost nobody would have predicted. He reached out for mental health treatment. He sought help. Whether that treatment went anywhere, whether he was diagnosed with anything, whether he ever followed through, nobody knows for certain. The records are incomplete. What is known is that by the time July arrived, whatever chance that help represented had passed. 3 months passed after Valley of the Moon. The investigation was still open. The tips had slowed. The sketch was still circulating in newspapers and on television across Anchorage. And in late October 2016, something happened that showed just how dangerously close the city was to this man, without knowing it. Trayvon Thompson's mother, Mandy Primo, was driving one evening when she spotted a man standing outside Alaska Regional Hospital who matched the sketch. She did not hesitate. She called emergency services and told the dispatcher she was getting out of the car to confront him herself. An officer on the line had to speak to her urgently and talk her back from the edge of that decision. She had an infant child in the back seat. The officer reminded her what was at stake. She stayed in the car. By the time police units reached the area, the man had vanished into the night. Whether it was truly him or not, there was no way to confirm. 3 weeks later, on the early morning of Saturday, November 12, 2016, a call came into the Anchorage Police Department at around 4:30. Routine. A man had taken a taxi ride and walked away without paying the fare. Officers in the downtown area near Fifth Avenue were asked to scan the area and locate the individual. Officer Arnie Salau, a 5-year veteran of the Anchorage Police Department, spotted a tall man walking along the sidewalk not far from the reported location. He pulled his cruiser alongside the man slowly, giving him space, keeping it calm. He turned on his lights and through his loudspeaker asked the man to stop. A simple request. The kind officers make dozens of times every shift without a second thought. The man kept walking, eyes forward, no reaction. Salau tried again, this time through the megaphone directly. "This is the Anchorage police. You need to stop." The man slowed his pace. Then he stopped completely. And then he turned around. He walked toward the cruiser, deliberately, calmly, reaching into his coat as he closed the distance. What happened in the next few seconds was over before most people would have had time to process it. The man raised the handgun identified by investigators and used it against Officer Salau through the cruiser door at close range. Salau was seriously injured. The damage was severe enough that most people in that situation do not walk away from it. Salau did not stay in the car. Fueled by something beyond what the body should be able to manage in that state, he pushed his door open and engaged back. Sergeant Mark Pletnikoff, pulling up in a second cruiser and immediately reading the situation, also responded from the opposite direction. The man was struck from two sides. He went down on the pavement, just a few feet from Salau's cruiser. He did not recover from his injuries. Officer Arnie Salau was rushed to the hospital. 7 hours of emergency surgery followed. The fact that he pulled through is something that his department, his family, and the people of Anchorage would later describe in terms that go beyond luck. The man on the ground was identified as James Dale Ritchie, 40 years old, born and raised in Anchorage. Someone who had not had a documented encounter with law enforcement in over a decade, quiet enough that his name had not risen to the surface of the investigation despite at least one tip mentioning him over the summer. The Colt Python was taken from his hand and sent directly to the Alaska State Crime Lab that same day. The results came back and said what 5 incident scenes had been pointing toward for 4 months. The weapon matched every round recovered from every prior location without exception. Jason Netter, Brianna Foyce, Trayvon Thompson, Kevin Turner, Bryant DeHussan, all 5. 1 weapon, 1 man, and a cab fare that nobody ever paid. 4 days after James Dale Ritchie passed away on that Anchorage pavement, the Anchorage Police Department issued a statement. The investigation had concluded. Ritchie had been responsible for all 5 tragedies during the summer of 2016. He had acted alone. All related investigations were now closed. But there was one detail that would stay with those who followed this case for a long time. Bobby Thompson, Trey's father, who was serving time in prison when his son lost his life, was James Dale, Ritchie's former best friend. The two had grown up together. Bobby's brother Quincy had passed away the day before James left for college, a loss that people close to both men said affected James deeply. Nearly 30 years later, James Ritchie had taken the life of Bobby's son. Investigators could find no evidence that James knew who Trey was. No evidence that he had tracked him specifically. The most likely explanation is that it was a chance encounter. That Trey simply came down the wrong path at the wrong moment and crossed paths with a man who, for reasons nobody has ever fully understood, was targeting people in the night. Bobby Thompson, sitting in a prison cell, learned that the person who had taken his son was his oldest friend. He said he could not wrap his head around it. People who had known James when they were all young said the same thing. He came home, one told a reporter, and something happened. I don't know what. Nobody does. James Dale Ritchie never faced a courtroom. He never gave a statement to investigators. He left no explanation. There was no clear motive connecting all 5 individuals whose lives were cut short. No financial trail. No personal history with most of the people whose lives he ended. No pattern that made investigators confident they understood why this happened the way it did. The individuals affected were different people, from different parts of the city. The only things they had in common were a trail, an early morning hour, and a man moving through the dark with a weapon. What is confirmed: 5 people who should still be here are gone. James Dale Ritchie was brought down on a November morning in 2016 during the officers' response to the confrontation. There was no trial, no final statement in a courtroom. The case was closed by a department statement a forensic match, and the silence of a man who took his reasons with him. 5 names deserve to be remembered: Jason Netter, Brianna Foisey, Trayvon Thompson, Kevin Turner, Bryant DeHusson. Cases like this one are reminders that danger rarely announces itself. Stay aware. Trust what feels wrong. And talk about these stories, because awareness is one of the most powerful things a community has. If this case made you think, share it with someone who needs to hear it. Subscribe and turn on notifications. Stay safe. Stay vigilant. Message Namaya.